What's up, dudes? Welcome back to another episode of Rhomas Men's Team. Pretty simple. We are a group of guys helping each other make progress towards each other's goals. If you're new to the channel, awesome and welcome. If you want to help support the channel and join our pro team, head over to rhomasteam.com/pro, where you can contribute to us on a donation basis. We also give you access to exclusive content, mastermind groups, etc., etc. So anyway, hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you on the team. Mr. Ray, what's going on, brother?
Good morning, Wes. I'm good. How are you?
Good, man. Let me invite one or two other dudes up here. If anybody wants to come on stage, let us know. We're going through the second half of Brene Brown's Braving acronym, which breaks down the individual components of trust, which I think is outstanding. Let me invite a few other people. How was the weekend, bro?
It was good, inching towards optimal health again after picking up whatever's going around. This bug, this flu, this whatever it is. Went out to the country to do my weekend gallery gig. It was good. Yeah, can't complain. I mean, lots to complain about, but, life is good, man. I've got my men. I've got my support system. Life is good.
More importantly, you got Corey. Corey, what's up, my friend? How you doing?
Hey guys, hey gents. I'm good, man. Hanging in there.
Corey, I don't know if you were on last week, but we were going through Brene Brown's trust. I guess reverse engineering trust, and she's a ground up researcher. So what she did was, I think she took a big poll and talked about, okay, what are the individual components of trust? And then she put her sort of like academic wrapper around it. And I just thought it was outstanding. It's not something that us men really talk a lot about, but I think it's important for us that we adopt her curriculum, or at least consider it. All right, so we're going to go through. So we went through the first three, I believe, on Friday. We're going to finish up on the last four right now. So
just quick reminder, boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. That's the acronym BRAVING. And so we've done boundaries. Setting boundaries is making clear what's okay and what's not okay and why. Reliability, you do what you'll say you'll do. At work, this means staying aware of your competencies and limitations so you don't overpromise and are able to deliver on commitments and balance competing priorities. And then we discussed accountability. You own your own mistakes, apologize, and make amends.
Yep, 100%. And guys who are new, I invite just random dudes up here. Don't feel pressure that you got to come up. But if you do come up, be ready to share either a win, a loss, an obstacle, or a comment on what we're currently talking about. All right. So the next section of Braving trust would be, for Brene Brown, is integrity.
Sorry, Wes. The vault, did we discuss the vault, the V?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. Why don't we redo it if not? I think you're right.
With vault is the V in Braving. You don't share information or experiences that are not yours to share. I need to know that my confidences are kept and that you're not sharing with me any information about other people that should be confidential. I think we may have discussed this one because there's someone near and dear to me who the way she crowdsources the kind of information or her learning process involves disclosing every private detail of her life and everyone else's life. So there's no door on that vault. I think we did discuss that one last week.
Yep, you're right. Riley, what's up, brother? All right, let's hop into the next one. The next one is integrity. So integrity, Brene Brown says, is choosing courage over comfort. It's choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy. Integrity, she says, is more than just naming our values. It's living according to our values. Plus, when we live with integrity, we not only build trust with others, we build trust with ourselves. So, Corey, let me throw the ball over to you. When I say those words, what resonates with you?
That's a good question. So, I mean, I might try to play devil's advocate a little bit here
Hmm.
on the definition because um, I think, I mean, and Wes, I would love to get your perspective on this, but I think in order to be a successful entrepreneur, sometimes you got to kind of bend the rules a little bit. And so, you know, I'm not saying it's bad or good or anything like that, but I think that there's a time and a place for every decision that you make in regards to integrity. So like I think obviously maintaining relationships, like um no questions asked, like you do what you say you do, you're accountable for your actions. That to me is integrity. But when it comes to being like successful, sometimes you might have to find that gray area in between your values and winning. And so that's kind of I view it integrity as just say doing the things that you say you're going to do, or at least attempting, and then if regardless whether success or failure, accountable for whatever the result is. To me,
Yeah, I think I can definitely hop on the bandwagon of that last comment of integrity. A large part for me is doing what you said you're going to do. And then I like the reputational part, which is do what your brand, what your reputation implies you are going to do. So, hey, even though I didn't say that particular thing, it is congruent with my values. Um, I'm kind of a big stickler on this for myself, especially inside of intimate relationships. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of, how do you say this? Like in the world of like pickup artists, when they talk about peacocking and so on. I understand where it comes from. I understand that like a peacock shows its feathers to show that, essentially it can expend more calories on its colors. That's how many, because it has excess calories, etc. But a peacock can't fake it. I'm not a fan of posturing on something that you haven't built yet, if that makes sense. And I also understand, Corey, what you're saying, that there's a little bit of a gray area. Like you do have to reach, I would say, 10 to 20% beyond where you are right now. Like that zone of proximal development, I think is what they call it. And for me, that's not incongruent. That's not a lie. That's just like, hey, I'm reaching. But for me, integrity is a really big component. It's helped me a lot in relationships, of at least for me being able to point back to the flag in the sand of saying, hey, it seems like the thing that you fell in love with me for is the exact thing you hate me for. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I work a lot, right? You knew that, but I haven't changed the rules of the game. And for me, when people change the rules of the game, that moving field goal post drives me crazy, and it brings a lack of stability to a family dynamic, a business dynamic, a friend dynamic. Ray, what's your perspective on this topic?
Well, just going back to the definition, as you read it, the two um, sentence fragments that stick out for me are choosing courage over comfort and practicing your values, not just professing them. Those are the two um, things that hop out to me. And choosing courage over comfort, like another expression that comes to mind, is the hard thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. And yeah, I think integrity seems like a really uh, kind of high, noble, lofty concept. But I think it can be pretty easy to do. Just try to do the right thing most of the time. And like just to throw it over to Corey, like yeah, like I think someone who's completely inflexible in their integrity is going to be someone who's pretty hard to work with or live with. So I think different situations call for a different kind of man to show up. Yeah, I think just doing the right thing most of the time is good enough
well,
for me.
the right thing is dependent upon perspective, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I think integrity is really determined by each individual, right? If I do something that you completely disagree with, that it doesn't match with your values, but I view it as integrity because it's along my moral compass or whatever it is, then so I think it obviously, it's a different definition depending on who you ask. But I think what it comes down to is authenticity, being, kind of like for what Wes said, just especially in like relationships, be as transparent as possible so that you have nothing to hide, and then you have nothing to regret as well, right? What if I was honest about this or that, or this is who I am as a person. I love, I'm obsessed with my career. That's a part of my DNA. And, in order for you to get on board, you have to come to grips with kind of who I am as a person. Oh, you're on mute, Wes.
Larry, what are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, howdy, everyone.
Brother?
It's good to be back. I think that to me, integrity is double-sided coin. One side is when you're with other individuals, then it's about alignment. What is the group agreed upon? What is the ultimate destination? What are the values? And then as an individual, integrity to me is, as what I think Corey mentioned it, or maybe Wes, maybe it was Ray. It's the bar. I think it was Ray. It's a pretty high bar, and it's something you measure yourself against relative to your own personal growth. And you can do integrity relative to what the society is telling you is the right thing to do, or you should be defining it for yourself as to how you want to grow as a man and what you want to grow into, and then give yourself the opportunity to recognize that the practice field is life, and we're on it, and we're continuing to see how we're doing. Somebody mentioned the comment in the chat that it's what you're doing when nobody's watching, and it's funny, sometimes we try to sneak on ourselves. And we know we're sneaking because it's not what we had decided was good for us, but we're going to do it anyway. And I think it's just a measurement. I think you have to be kind of at peace with yourself on the fact that you're going to be fallible. But yet, if you lean on the side, like you mentioned, Wes, nothing upsets you more than you get into a relationship. She knew you were working all the time. And don't be naive enough to think that now that you've got a partner, there's going to be some things that you've gotten comfortable with that are who you are and what your integrity justifies that aren't going to be in harmony with developing a relationship. Mm-hmm. Because there's a sacrifice, there's a time commitment there to grow that relationship. And again, as we've talked about earlier, you got to make those dates. You have to set those things up so that you're not just working through it and, I just had to get this done, and honoring the relationship as much as you do the work or whatever else it may be. So I think alignment is a big key for me.
Yeah. And I think because we've been talking from sort of like our own individual perspectives outward, but I think it's important for us to remember also the receiving end of it. How does it feel to be on the receiving end of somebody who you feel like lacks the integrity, lacks the congruence, lacks the predictability? Hey, I knew you as this person prior, and now you're kind of switching things on me. I expected this, and now I get something else. And that's okay. But to build any friendship, business partnership, relationship off of that dynamic is really hard, because it's kind of like shooting a cannon from a canoe, as they say. There's no foundation. Mm-hmm. So really interesting perspective. Let's hop on to the next one. Non-judgment. Non-judgment is about being vulnerable with someone without being judged by them. While they can be vulnerable and able to not be judged by us, this is hard, Brene Brown says, because we tend to be better at giving help than asking for it. In fact, we tend to feel better about ourselves when we help someone else, but think less of ourselves when we ask for help. You cannot judge yourself for needing help, but not judge others for needing help as well. That's what makes a true reciprocal non-judgment difficult. Ray, I'll throw the mic to you, brother. Hey dudes, sorry for the interruption here. Just wanted to let you know if you want to join our pro team, go to romasteam.com/pro. You can help support the channel. You will also get access to exclusive content, masterminds, one-on-one sessions, etc. All right, back to the episode.
Wes, we're lucky that you and I enjoy a non-judgmental relationship. Like you're the first person that comes to mind, man. And I struggle to think of another person in my life with that I have a non-judgmental relationship with, because like when I have trouble asking for help, right? And when it's time for me to ask for help, it's because, like, so to speak, I'm at the last house on the block. You know what I mean? I've exhausted every other kind of like plan, or I've attempted every other solution. And so all these things are easier said than done. All these things are like it's almost as if they're really like higher self thinking and behaviors that take practice. And so, Wes, I'm glad we enjoy a relationship of non-judgment. I think it's not true of all my relationships.
Well, I thank you for the compliment, man. And right back at you. I wonder how much in here is a sense of independence where there's nothing that you could say to me or I could say to you that would push me back to poverty. Do you know that would bring me to such a depth where I'm completely unstable? I wonder if there's a component to vulnerability that it's like, at the end of the day, I'll be fine. That I'd rather be vulnerable with Ray because it'll help advance our relationship, and hey, maybe even help advance other men as well. So the upside is way more significant than the potential downside of what's the worst that could happen. Ray could get mad at me. Okay, what's the worst going to happen with Ray? I could get mad at Ray. We could not be friends anymore. Well, I've got other friends, and so does he. But and in a weird way, I think when it comes from that perspective, there's nothing he and I could do to hurt each other to such a degree that it takes us out of the game. Corey, what's your perspective?
I mean, I feel like you guys touched on a lot of good points there. I think I think it's very hard not to have biases. You're naturally, because of your experiences, and so you really have to kind of, consciously think in a non-judgment way. But it's also, going back to integrity, you need a safe place in order to feel comfortable enough to tell Ray the truth about something that you're feeling, right? And then he has to be receptive enough in order to take that as criticism and not actual judgment. And so it's a very, very fine line between all the two. But I think as long as you have good relationships and they're authentic and transparent, I think you can definitely cultivate that non-judgment zone for sure.
Corey, do you have a tough time being vulnerable? Because I have a hell of a time. Like, it is crazy difficult for me. Ray honestly is one of the few relationships where I can, like, because of what he was saying earlier. Otherwise, honestly, I feel like I'm losing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's very, very tough for me. And not only that, I really have to think about what result I want, right? Is it just, venting, just frustration, or do I want that person to actually, like, I'm in a place to where I need help solving this critical issue. And sometimes I really have to think, like, what result do I want? And is this the right individual to me to ask about help? But that being said, yeah, it's very, very difficult to be in a vulnerable place. I feel like, Wes, like, same thing. Like, we tend to carry the world on our shoulders and, just add more weight, right? But we're human beings, and sometimes we have to kind of put ourselves out there. I think it's growth. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think this has come back to bite me because trying to maintain, and this is not some sort of humble brag, it's a legitimate pattern that maybe other guys can relate to. which is like trying to maintain a sort of stoic posture, at times has backed me into a corner and let certain individuals know it's like, hey, just so you know, I am also a human who has feelings, and that's fucking offensive what you just said. Or like the fact that you keep on putting more on my plate. At some point, I'm going to take a measurement of the scales, and that asymmetry is going to come up in our conversations. But that might be unfair of me because I've been playing a certain role for, let's say, too long, to where the others around me might come to expect that. And that's not their fault. That is very likely my fault. Larry, what are your thoughts, bud?
What strikes me is the why judgment becomes important to begin with. Why we're even having a conversation about it. Because theoretically, the aspiration that we all are on, the quest we're on, is self-acceptance. And when you've decided that it's okay to be you, judgment doesn't exist any longer. Because there's no more trying to be right. There's no more how am I doing, in the sense, and I'm not talking about growing and developing. I'm talking about this self-image, this concept of what do people think of me, and why did they say that, and what did they mean by that? And the only reason we're doing that is because we haven't been okay with ourselves yet. And I think that's something that is really important, that the journey that we're all on is to be able to open our eyes in the morning and be excited about the adventure, instead of checking out how we're doing all day long, instead of focusing on what we're doing. And, when you get into the philosophies of letting go, you get into the philosophies of not being attached, and all these are really philosophies. They're not necessarily something that we're able to acquire and own all the time. We have these glimpses of, God, I really feel good about myself today. And we can't say that when we go, well, did you do this though? And, were you the best that you possibly could have been over here? And that's when judgment comes into play. I remember I didn't experience it until I was really little. I couldn't see up to the sink. And my mom looked outside the window and said, look at that lawn. And I looked at the lawn, and it wasn't a lawn, it was a hayfield, because they weren't mowing it. But we had trails in it, and it was our camps, and it was a wonderland. And then I started to recognize, oh, it's not supposed to look like that. And then I think that, to me, that's where judgment began for me, is things are supposed to be a certain way. And I think back to integrity, who decides that? And I think as men now, we're beginning to recognize, if not already, that we're the ones that are supposed to decide that. And Emerson on self-reliance is talking about the fact that we've got to be brave enough to be ourselves and not allow that to be open to discussion, but be open, as Brene Brown, continues to talk about. And I think that non-judgment element is just think in terms of relative to acceptance.
Frank, what's your perspective, bud?
I love what Larry just said. I completely agree that the fear of judgment stops when you completely accept and love yourself, because your current state of who you are, whether somebody's judging or not, you can assess the feedback that you're given, but you can also say, I still love myself. I still think I'm a good person, and I'm content with who I am. Judgment, I think about this in the terms of creating a safe space. To me, judgment is the enemy of influence. That doesn't mean you can't provide assessments on somebody's situation. But the minute you start judging them is the minute you stop being a positive influence on them. Whether you are leading a team at a company or you are the guardian of a family, if you're unable to create a safe space that people feel vulnerable being their authentic, genuine self, where they can find an avenue to love them truly for themselves because there's judgment that's prevalent in that atmosphere, that they're never going to be able to bring their full authentic self, get feedback from you to improve from that. There's going to be posturing, positioning, peacocking, whatever you call it when there's judgment. because they want to supersede their authentic self to satisfy or to prevent that judgment from happening. So creating a safe space that's judgment-free, whether it's in business or in your personal life, to me, it is truly fundamental to creating an atmosphere of trust that then allows you to have influence on people.
Ooh, that's a wise soul right there.
Oh yeah, Frank's a beast. Frank, what do you think about? Because let me say this. I think when it comes to this topic, there can be sort of a logical chess match of saying, okay, well then great, call it judgment, call it assessment, call it taking it, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, is it still some sort of comparison or contrasting to something? So I wonder if there's an element of, hey, we won't judge you in this family unfairly, or replace the word, we won't assess you, right, and your performance with this family unfairly, but we do have expectations. Our expectations are you don't do drugs, you don't upset the harmony, right, of the family, you don't go out, you don't curse at mom, you don't do this, blah blah blah. How do you get around that component if somebody says, well, hey man, don't judge me?
For me, and this is more from a work environment perspective, if I have a direct report that's underperforming, I think the difference between assessment and judgment is judgment assigns intention to why they are where they got to. You're lazy, you don't care, you're not passionate. To me, those are judgmental remarks as to where we are today. The assessment is, hey, you're underperforming, the project didn't get delivered on time, etc. The quality wasn't there. The assessment to me detracts from who they are as an individual. It doesn't put any claim on their worth or their value, and it only assesses the facts.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common theme in psychology and relationship books and so on. It's like, you critique the behavior, not the individual. Hey, what you're doing is this. What you're doing is not functional towards the goal that we both agreed on. Not you are this. Arjuna, welcome, buddy. You raised your hand to come up on board. What's your perspective, friend?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I think that we all, in this world that we all live in, it's a world of suffering. We all have to suffer in one way or another, physically, that's a part of energy that we have to put out. And I think that the more work that people do in looking at accountability, self-awareness, what have you, then I guess what I'm getting at is intuitively, I can always tell when someone's showing up to the table and kind of heavying the present moment. I can tell, I can feel, you can kind of, with some measure of intuition, you can feel when someone's kind of projecting that suffering outwardly. And whether what I'm saying is right or wrong, I kind of look at it more as like a coping mechanism, where it's like, that's a set of mental structures that I've created to have empathy for people when they show up in that way. Because then it's not like, oh, you're doing something wrong. It's just more like, oh, I recognize this suffering because I've grown out of it through my own involvement. And now I can just see that for what it is. And I don't have to judge it. And I don't even have to really necessarily give you structures to get you out of it. But I just see it and I understand it for what it is. So I don't really have to assign any sort of like, sure, you may be showing up and it may be inconveniencing what I might be doing in this present moment or what my intention is. But at the end of the day, I could say that to you, but I don't have to feel any way about it. I can just objectively point it out. Hey, this is going on. But yeah, that's kind of like my take on judgment. I hold that coping mechanism to be like, okay, well, this person's obviously suffering and I can empathize with that.
Mm. No, that makes complete sense. It reminds me of that phrase, hurt people. And if you can recognize that, and then you can come almost from a place of empathy rather than a place of defensiveness and attacking. I'm still very much working on that particular component. All right, final item here on Brene Brown's list, generosity. Brene Brown says, our relationship is only a trusting relationship if you can assume the most generous thing about my words, intentions, and behaviors, and then check in with me. Which means that if we make a mistake, others will be upfront about it, but assume we had good intentions. This might look like someone telling us that they are hurt, that we didn't call them on an important day, but they assume we just forgot or were busy. This gives us a chance to be accountable and this goes both ways. It's important that we also check in and leave space for others to be accountable. This happens to be a pretty important one for me because it's hard for me to transition out of, right, whether it be like a stoic mindset or a business mindset and so on, and then easily transition that out into like my intimate relationship or my friendships, etc. So I oftentimes can come off relatively cold, but it's so important for me, to have people around me who give me that generous interpretation of, oh, Wes isn't trying to hurt me. He's just still in sport mode. So that thing that so then if he can check, if those people can check in with me, give me the benefit of the doubt. And honestly, Ray does such a great job with me on this. If I'm late to a meeting or if I'm something like this, he doesn't assume that I'm trying to hurt him in any way. What he assumes, which is I'm usually on 15 other phone calls prior, has nothing to do with him or anybody else, as I'm trying to juggle a lot of balls. So Ray, let me throw the mic over to you, brother. What's your perspective?
You said you're still in sport mode, right? But doesn't Tesla have a ludicrous mode?
Yeah, ludicrous plus too, bro. Yeah.
Yeah. So Wes, the problem is that you're usually stuck in ludicrous mode. I think that's what the issue is.
Yeah,
and
exactly
I know
right.
that you've taught me this one before, like when I've had a standoff with a neighbor or a client or vendor or something. For my own mental health, it's usually the best thing to do is to have this generosity mindset, which is extending the most generous interpretation to the intentions, words, and actions of others. So, and like Arjuna said, Arjuna's like filled to the brim with wisdom too, man. And that what he just said about like, people are probably like, it's healthy to just your first assumption should be that people are just like outwardly projecting whatever suffering they're going through, right? And so I think that whenever I've been fired up, like I said, about a neighbor or a vendor or something, someone not paying me, or you've said like, let's just assume that there's a kind of a language disconnect here, that there isn't kind of malice going on, and then adjust, and then I can adjust my response accordingly. And if it ends up being malice, I can escalate. But to start with, like the healthiest move is just to assume that their behavior or words are not designed to injure me, but is just an expression of whatever else they're trying to juggle in their life.
Yeah, what do they say? The mental model of assume ignorance before malevolence. I really like that phrase. It helps me often through life. Corey, what's your perspective, brother? And you are on mute, just as heads up.
Yeah, I gotcha. This one I'm always working on because, like, in some capacity of my life, I might feel wronged, and not, being generous with my thoughts, giving grace to the individuals. That's I work on in all my relationships. I think when you have that chip on your shoulder, you tend to be the first one to lash out or I'm a very emotional person, and so what happens is I tend to let the emotions get caught up with my emotions, which causes me to lash out versus giving grace. And so that one I'm constantly working on. But I guess what to Ray's point, what I want to ask this question is like what determines whether someone is malicious or not? If you're giving them grace, I guess how do you discern it? Is it accountability, like them being truly apologetic for whatever might have wronged you, or what discerns one from the other?
Who wants to take a stab at that?
Oh,
I've got no compass for
you,
that.
Ray, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, anybody here.
So I can take a stab because I run into this quite a bit. So I think that the vast majority of time it is ignorance. And in the clinical definition, right? Just an absence of knowledge. And I am completely guilty of this almost all of the time, but I think Corey, what you're asking is, well, how do you establish the malicious part? And what I do there is I actually take it out of the malicious part and I put it into dysfunctional terminology. Okay, what you're doing is now either has repeated so much where you might not be trying to hurt me, but you're certainly getting in the way of the objective, which, which hurts me in the secondary market here, right? So those two to me are almost the same thing because it's still a barrier to the goal. So I think then, and this is super tedious. In fact, I've had a recent conversation about this as early as last night, of saying, hey, when you do something like this, it does feel like it's a pattern to me. I know that's a trigger word, but it feels like it's happened more than a couple times. And my concern is that even though there's an apology behind it, which seems authentic, it's still happening. So I don't know that we're on the same page, almost at a value level, because it's one thing to apologize, but what I need you to do is remember it at the time where you're about to do that action again, because now I've got to clean it up and now we have to have this conversation and so on. So please, if you can, no different than you don't forget your phone, right? So that's obvious. You never forget your phone. So that's clearly a level of importance for you where the action is executed almost 100%. So what I need you to do is, if it's okay, take that level of importance, phone level importance, and put that into the compartment of your brain so that you get the execution level up to the phone level. Does that make sense? And if you don't, that's okay, but it's a level 10 important thing for me. This is not a judgment, but just know that we cannot exist in a similar capacity to what we do now if you keep on coming back to like, oh, I forgot. So that's not functional for me. No judgment, you're not a bad person, but that's not functional for me. Larry, what's your perspective?
Yeah, when I heard that, you're talking about that. If I was receiving what you just shared, I'd feel judged.
Yeah.
That I'm not living up to, and I behaved a certain way. And I think rather than maybe continue to articulate the disconnect between what you expect and what you're receiving, is where's the intentionality? On this whole concept of generosity, the intentionality is you're coming from love. If you're not coming from love, there's no way you're going to be generous. You're going to be generous in a manipulative way. I did this for you, so now I expect something in return. And this is the other thing to be concerned about and be aware of, is when we look at the science and the physiology behind us, and we look at our brain, remember our brain can't stand a vacuum. And when it doesn't receive information, we all know it has a negative bias, and that's the reptilian brain, fight, flight, freeze, trying to protect us, is that we make up the difference. We start talking to ourselves about why they behave that way, or why they didn't text us back, or what that text meant. And 99 times out of 100, we develop a negative scenario. And we do that not because we're negative so much as we've got to protect ourselves. So I'm going to prepare myself that what the intention was not positive. This is where choice comes into play. This is what's so marvelous about us as human beings. I need to choose to look at that as you folks were talking earlier, they must have forgotten. They had something going on. And then when I have the communication, find out. Don't try to make it up in the meantime, because we do it to ourselves, we'll do it to others, is we will go to the side of, unless we have conditioned ourselves to do the challenge, which is, am I coming from love? And if you're not, then the chances are pretty good you're either coming from, which will cause manipulation, is you're coming from judgment because you were somehow offended. And as Brene Brown would talked about, you just got shamed. And that might not necessarily be, more often than not, the intent, because that is where malicious comes into play. Mean-spiritedness. Somebody is coming across just to make you feel less than so they can feel better about themselves. So that's kind of my take on generosity, is take a look at the intent before and find it out. I've noticed this behavior a few times. What's going on? That's how you would converse with Ray. You go, Ray, and the reason you do that with Ray is because you love Ray. You're not deciding whether to love Ray. That's that little romantic element as we go, I wonder if this is going to work out. And, obviously there's some merit in that. Mm-hmm. But when we come from love, we're not wondering if it's going to work out. We're curious now about who this individual is. And we're fascinated by experiencing their growth together.
Larry, I wonder if Corey would say, and Corey, let me know if I'm violating the spirit of your question. If Corey would say, that's awesome. But if this person now is on the 15th time, we're on the 15th iteration of him coming back to, X person and saying, hey, we talked about this. I love you. This is also the 16th time we've talked about it. I still love you. The problem still keeps on happening. What do you say there, Larry?
Well, you don't go 15 times. Come on. You had the conversation the first or second time. And if they continue to act that way, then we have a disconnect on alignment. We don't have to share the same values. We sell cars here, and you want to fix, radiators, which is fine, but you're in the wrong department. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that we do in business when we have a disconnect is we find out what's going on with the individual, because we want to, as leaders, create an environment where others can be successful. We want to do that as parents. We want to do that with each other in this conversation today. And if our goal is to create an environment where each other can be successful, sometimes it's not going to happen in this one. You can't be successful in here because we expect this and you keep doing this. And, were we remiss when you came on board and we talked about the values and you seemed to see the fit there? Well, that's not happening now because the last 3 meetings you've showed up 10 minutes late, and we all want to be there for each other, and what you're doing is violating that. So what's going on? Is it a car issue? Do you have trouble getting the kids off to school? Let's talk about it. And typically, if we attend to that soon enough, if we've got, and I know you were exaggerating, but the 15th time, come on. The sooner we bring up disparity, the less we have this whole suffering, this whole challenge experience. And life's too short to be struggling through it, for crying out loud. We're supposed to be joyous and having fun through it, even though when I got divorced, I wouldn't say it was fun. But when I put it into perspective, I was now rectifying something that wasn't working in my life. Mm. And so I'm looking forward to the next opportunity, and I think that's where the real challenge. If there's a struggle, it's to get off of what isn't going on and back to how you want to show up.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that second question, because I think that there's a risk of walking away from a conversation like this. And if somebody would take your advice, Larry, and which is great, they could walk away before we ask that second question of like, oh, just always approach it with love and in perpetuity. Now I feel like, you're more of like a delusional evangelist. Yeah, that just like always has the same response regardless of like the context. Yeah. Because I do think there's an element of either being naive or just a non-willingness to confront a non-workable issue. Frank, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I actually have a real life example of the scenario you provided. I had handpicked an individual to join my team a few years back, and top performer, great results, management loved him. He joined my team and he stopped, to be completely honest. Started to not deliver versus previous examples of his work, etc. And I could have approached this without generosity, but that would have been more taxing, not only on him, but also on me. I think we've been talking this concept of generosity as if we're doing a favor for other people, but acting with generosity is a big favor to ourselves as well. So what was the ultimate outcome is he wasn't passionate about the job anymore. He wanted to do public policy, and we were in consumer product goods doing sales. And I approached him by, hey, I know you can be capable of delivering stellar results. I'm seeing that you're not passionate, not engaged, what's going on. And we literally went to a coffee shop, sat down for 4 hours and mapped out what he wants to do with his life. And the ultimate outcome is I helped usher him out of the company. I set up a process and tried to find something better for him. And the end result would have been the same, regardless of if I approached that with generosity or not. But because I approach it with generosity, he's still a great friend of mine. We still keep in touch. And typically, having a employee leave the company is one of the most stressful parts of being a manager. And that was not a stressful time for me at all because of that generosity approach. So it's not only something that we can do for others, but something we can do for ourselves as well.
Love it. All right. Well, we still have a little bit of time, so I want to take some creative liberty with Brene Brown's list here, and I want to add one component that's probably the biggest component for men in intimate relationships, which is cheating. Whether that be they are unbelievably fearful of being cheated on, and or also highly probable of cheating. This for me is a really tough topic because I'm almost religiously territorial in my intimate relationships to the point where for me it's like a mortal sin to be cheated on. So I'm curious, and maybe we can have even lengthier discussions on this. Ray, when I bring up that topic, what comes up for you? Because it's absent from Brene Brown's list, but I'm going to imagine for most of us men, that's probably the number one commandment. I'm going to assume, or at least towards the top three. Ray, what's your perspective?
Well, it used to be for me, Wes. It used to be like an absolutely radioactive topic, but I kind of loosened up over the years where I started by tolerating that behavior in myself. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went from it's not okay if I do it, it's not okay if she does it, to it's okay if I do it, it's not okay if she does it. Mm-hmm. And now I'm at the point where it's okay if both people do it. And I don't mean to live in a trust void. Right. But what I mean is I have a different kind of understanding of why it happens. Right. So if infidelity occurs, it does not happen in a vacuum. And the relationship was over. The trust was over before the infidelity took place. So for me, an act of infidelity doesn't necessarily end a relationship because the relationship was already over. If that person was looking, if that person was unsatisfied in the existing relationship. So the infidelity is merely just kind of formalizing or confirming a state that already existed. And then another attitude is that there's something human about it if it happens as often as it happens, so I have a kind of so that's the way that my thinking has evolved on the issue, where humans we're imperfect creatures, right? And so ideally we would break up with someone before the new sexual intimacy starts. It doesn't always happen that way. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but those are some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating perspective. One I'm sure Corey does not share with you. Corey, what's your perspective?
Yeah, unacceptable. But kind of going back to, I think Larry's comment here, you can't really approach that with generosity, right? There are examples here that I think across the board, right? Where depending on the severity to your perspective, it could be malicious out the gate, right? And my view on cheating is unacceptable, 100%, right? Because like I like to communicate. And so if there's something that, the relationship is missing, if there's something that needs to be worked on, I'm very, very trainable, right? I head down, I'll adjust accordingly. And, you have to have the same kind of partner in order to kind of grow like that. But that being said, yeah, I completely agree with you, Wes. I mean, I'd like to be Ray in this scenario where I approach it. Obviously, the relationship has started to unfold even before the cheating has done, and it's less about the emotion of the cheating and more about like okay, you are not into this relationship anymore. Very factual, like. I can take emotion out and just be like, okay, hey, we're not meant to be together, right? But I think in this regard, there are just some use cases where you cannot be generous with.
Yeah,
and it's all on perspective.
Yeah, and for the record, Ray, I actually admire your position on it. I think what is her name? Esther Perel, who wrote the book Mating in Captivity, she's looked at as one of the thought leaders in the relationship psychology space. I think she would actually take, Ray's position on this of, okay, wait a second, why is it such a mortal sin? Especially, and all we need to do to kind of dissect that is actually just flip the genders. The amount of guys that I know who say, well, hey, that's just biology, right? Like it has nothing to do with whether or not I love my wife. It's just that I was meant to spread my seed, man. And I can go over here and it be completely non-emotional. So I think a lot of us men can relate to that. Do you know what I mean? But then Corey, to your point, and by the way, I can understand that line of logic. But as soon as you flip the genders there, and it's like, well, now it's her. It's like, absolutely not, right? The relationship's over. It's obviously over, So it's a really interesting topic that I think as men we need to dive into more. Larry, what's your call on this?
Well, I think cheating is cheating, whether it's on a test or in a relationship. And again, I go back to alignment. If the agreement was monogamy, if the agreement was we're going to develop a life together, you're going to have to go through some challenges. You're going to have to go through some moments where you're wondering, why did I choose this person? And like we talked about in the relationship at work, you've got to have the conversation. You got to have enough courage to have the conversation. And, I think a lot of men aren't good at conflict. And most will avoid it at all cost because there's a win-lose thing involved in that. And the last thing we want to do is lose. So I think that the element is to go back to something greater than self. And if in your mind a relationship is the development of two individuals who want to have a life together, then there's just some parameters that have to go both ways. And if one chooses to go in another direction, we need to have that conversation to see if it's okay with the other one. If it's not, then that relationship's not going to work. And instead of having the courage to talk about it, well, we cheat. I've satisfied that urge, and now I'm forming a lie. And boy, we know where that takes us. And that's why I love that statement that Mark Twain said, is what I like so much about the truth is I don't have to try to remember what it was I said. And so I think that's really where I come across is if I'm going to be comfortable and happy with Larry, then I'm going to have to stop taking shortcuts unless I choose with the other person to have that kind of relationship up front. Or if it happens later on, we've talked about it, and then I can decide whether that's going to work for me or not. And, if you want me to get into judgmental, then, I think cheating is worse than murder. And because you're actually killing someone anyway from the deceit and the lie. And anyway, so there you go.
Yeah, no, this is outstanding because we can start to see the rainbow of opinions that we have here. Frank, what's your perspective?
I don't have too much to add that hasn't been said. The only thing is that this is what we're covering as a framework, right? And part of the framework that Brene Brown provided, I think I missed the first day, but I think boundaries is one of them. And so this whole concept is this is not an a la carte menu where you get to choose where you want to participate. This is a framework that then leads to the development of trust, and setting boundaries is one of them. And so I think what we're hearing here is everybody has different perspectives on infidelity and cheating. And those are very legitimate boundaries that you can set and then align those boundaries in concept with your partner, like Larry said.
Yeah, I'd be curious, and maybe this is an extended conversation, but I'd like to plant the seed here. I have a hypothesis about the marital contract, and the hypothesis is that people essentially spend almost 0% of their time really dissecting and or creating the contract that they are about to get into with another human being, supposed to be until they die. It seems like the statistics are showing that this is clearly a flawed mechanism. I think it's pretty obvious at this point. I wonder if there should be an element of, hey, we're going to get married, and two things. Number one, are each of us qualified to get married? I mean, we have to spend more time preparing for our driver's license than we have to spend on getting married, and whether or not we are qualified to drive, right? There are legal requirements and behavioral requirements around drinking in America. I would argue that there are dramatically less requirements for getting married. So I'd be curious if there's an element of, number one, are you qualified to get married? And number two, what specifically are you and your future spouse agreeing to? Because I would imagine there's some ambiguity there. You know, and I've been unpopular in certain circles by bringing these two particular things up. But Ray, what are your thoughts on that? Having these, and I'm going to go even further, having these documents. So like treating it so serious that it's like, oh, I'm actually going to take the time to write it down. Because I built a spreadsheet on whether or not I was going to buy a Tesla for 3.5 years. Probably I should make a spreadsheet or a document on whether or not like I'm qualified and or the agreements I'm making in a marital contract. Ray, what are your thoughts when I say this?
Well, Wes, I know why we have these barriers in front of a driver's license, right? Because like a 2-ton car can just become a killing machine in the wrong hands, right? Why do you propose there should be similar barriers in front of getting married? Like, what are the consequences that you hope are mitigated?
I would imagine if we took these genres of things a little more seriously, maybe you'd have less of me in the world, which is like a fatherless child. I'm just guessing, you know, or you'd have less adults who have childhood trauma due to alcoholism or whatever it is, right? Or I mean, I don't even want to get into the idea of how much domestic violence, how much domestic manslaughter, like all of these types of things, because people are entering into a territory that is just basically a black abyss that they have no idea what they're signing up for. They only do it because society has told them they should do it.
Well, I think they're still going to have a relationship. Maybe they just won't get married because it becomes so difficult now. They're still going to have a relationship. They're still going to have kids. They're still going to drink. They're still going to have arguments. They're still going to leave one another. And I think it gets down to the element of, unfortunately, none of us are born with wisdom necessarily, even though we're born with everything. And we have a collective unconscious of all things that have evolved prior to our popping out of the womb. And, you know, I just think there's a whole element of regulation that causes all of us to resist and push back unless we agree with the regulation. And it's like Ray and I may be in different camps relative to relationships, because I was monogamous in the second grade. I was the only kid on the bus sitting next to a girl and everybody's laughing at me. But I always used to envy these guys that had all these different relationships going on. I was a one at a time kind of guy. And that's not right or wrong. It's just how I was wired. And my parents stayed together for 70 years and found out didn't really like each other. And so, there's really no model out there, and I don't think we can establish it or regulate it without creating even another problem. Because we're prone to evolve, we're prone to be curious, we're prone to resist. Don't eat chocolate, it's all you see. Now you're fighting yourself not to have a bite. So I think as all of you have talked about, and I think, what Brene Brown's all about is we need to be empathetic towards one another. We need to realize that person has had totally different experiences than I have. And for me to judge them is to limit myself and to alienate the relationship with that individual that I'm judging. So I don't mean to sound loosey-goosey, but I just think that we're evolving and things are going to change. And when we regulate, we're trying to keep it a certain way. And it's going to be obsolete before we know it.
Well, and just so everybody knows, I am not proposing, I don't want the government to get involved any more than they already have been. I think it's been a disaster historically up until this point. I'm saying actually for ourselves, right? Like I can tell you when I was part of being put together the operating agreement with our attorneys for my business partnership, it was super rational. And I would argue that we spent way more time on that than any of my friends have spent on their marital contracts. In fact, I could almost guarantee it. Mm-hmm. So we had paragraph by paragraph. Hey, if you do this, not a moral judgment, but if you do this, then you're done, right? You forfeit your shares of the company and they will be given to me or vice versa. And we will go to fair market value. And by the way, it will be discounted because you didn't act in accordance with our agreement, right? Like in finance, like you can't get to the decimal, and I'm not pretending you can, but you can get massively more accurate than the current marital contract. I know people who are paying alimony and or receiving alimony until they get married again, right? And the person who's paying it didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, like the honeymoon stage, if that makes sense.
Good point.
I know we only have a few more minutes here, but Corey, what comes up for you around this particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, I lean a little bit more into Larry's camp because I do feel like you can do as much due diligence. You can communicate. You can say, okay, hey, this is my authentic person. This is what I require in a relationship and everything like that. But at the end of the day, like you evolved, your relationship will constantly evolve. There will be changes. Yeah. There's like I mean, I think we had this conversation a while back, but you can only control a certain amount of variables, right? And so focus on the ones that you can control. Like I think your approach is awesome in terms of saying this is what I need in order to be happy in a long, successful relationship. Can you agree with that or disagree with that? Then you can have an open discussion. But once that's said and done, then it's kind of like, okay, hey, you got to put energy into making that happen. We are human beings. Yep. We make mistakes. We make wrong decisions. Part of our journey. And so being able to evolve that contract throughout time, maybe some of those things that you were a stickler on now don't really apply anymore, right? And so being flexible enough to say, hey, let's throw the rule book away. We all make mistakes, and to move on and have the same in a partner as well, I think is really critical. So yeah, I think control what you can, prepare, obviously, come in with the right mindset, and just make sure you put enough effort in order to make sure that you evolve together.
And like I said, I know we can dive deep into this for several hours. Corey, prenuptial agreements, like them, hate them?
I mean, I think they're necessary for sure. I think I mean, obviously, depending upon all situations, you guys are building a life together. And making sure that you feel like you're protected in any capacity, right? It's being risk adverse, but you don't be risk averse enough to where it's detrimental to that you're two individuals just kind of combining, right? And so it's very hard to navigate that scenario. But I think they're definitely 100% necessary in certain circumstances. Yes.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Frank, what's your perspective, bud?
I probably approach this concept of a relationship contract closer to you, Wes, and I think we all do it to some degree. That's why we date, right? The dating process could be 4 years long, and that's your assessment of a soft agreement. In business, your contract isn't in perpetuity. It gets renewed every year, every 2 years. There's economic factors that changes the situation. And it's same thing with humans. We can't control and restrict and predict human behavior. We're animals at the end of the day. And so can you use your 2-3 years of dating to form a soft understanding of, is there a contract between my values and this other individual's values? And you keep reassessing that and updating it after major moments of life change and as our partners change and as we change, so that you're maintaining some type of rigor and understanding if within this partnership we're aligned on our values.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is because of the line of work that I do. I often think if we keep the conversation at an abstract level, it tends to, in my view, land more on like the Disney version of relationships. And also, I think it's important to study the evolution of marriage. What we know as marriage today is not like, this is a fact, is not what it was a handful of generations ago. It's not the same origin. So I think there tends to be this like, hey, this tradition is here for a reason. Like, wait a second, time out. The tradition is actually it's not even, it's 80% different than what it was before. But what I want all guys, including myself, to think of is just like, this is it is the most serious decision you will make in your life, at least as far as my assessment goes. And just know that if you do not think through this, then there's a significantly high probability, and it depends on certain metrics and so on, but there's a strong chance that you get divorced. And if you make more than your spouse, then there's another strong chance that you will have to pay that person who you are no longer, right, like related to, right, like in a marital contract anymore. And that could have severe consequences on your ability to pay for expenses for your future family. Like, think about that. Hey, I now have to pay for this person who cheated on me. Let's just say, who cheated on me. She was the one who made the decision to go outside of the relationship, and now I have to pay for her. And by the way, it could be just as easily the reverse. And now, since I have to pay, and I think the calculus is take whatever that person is person number one, the higher breadwinner, and then take the second person if they're making zero, right? And then you split the difference. So if you make 200,000 and the other partner makes zero, now you have to pay that person 100 grand. I might be totally wrong about this. This is my understanding from talking to an accountant who is dealing with this right now, right? Well, that 100 grand is probably really important. Now, if I have kids, right? Let's say a year later I get married, and then 2 years later I have kids and so on. Well, that 100 grand is now being siphoned from my current family into potentially someone else's family, right? And also, I know someone who right now is not getting married because that person's alimony would stop. So now I could be paying for somebody else and her boyfriend. This to me is insane. It makes zero sense, zero fucking sense. I want to be like very clear about this. It is highly irrational, and in no other genre, we would never do that in business, ever, right? It's so unbelievably irrational that it would never exist. So I'm just calling attention to it because I want to draw a level of specificity that oftentimes is lost in the conversations that are a little too abstract. Sorry, Ray, you got me really angry here. Ben, what's your perspective?
So last night, me and my fiance were talking.
Hold on, Ben. I haven't spoken in about 10 minutes, Wes, so I don't think I'm sorry. Man. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to add kind of it's, when talking about marriage, it seems like today, there's only bad things to say about it. And I mean, my parents split up, you know what I'm saying? It seems like that's the story for almost everyone. But last night, me and my fiance were talking just about kind of like, I don't know, just stuff in general. And her dad died about like a couple months ago. And he was married to their mom. They were married for 30 years. And when his life ended, they were still married, you know? And because me and her were with him in the hospital, and we were like, you know, we were sitting right next to him when he took his last breath. But, you know, I've taken myself and my views on marriage, I think, has totally changed since witnessing that, seeing like the full circle complete and someone, you know, their life end in a happy marriage. And, you know, he did the whole thing. So it was just kind of a positive thing that she brought that up to me, and I hadn't really considered it, but it was just something I wanted to share with getting into this. You know what I mean?
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, Ben, thank you for talking me off the ledge.
Thank you for resetting the energy here, man.
Yeah. Well, and I also want
That's
to.
exactly what it did for me when she brought that up. I mean, totally reset my views. So it just, you know, happened to be that conversation was last night. But
Yeah. And so I want to be also really clear. I actually really love the idea, right? All I'm saying is that I think we need we need an iron gate around that idea of like, hey, if we're going to do this, here's what that actually means. And if you do these things, whether or not you verbally say you want to get out, if your actions speak otherwise for either of us, then we're out. Because we are trading, I think as Alex and Moses said, you're trading, right, like novelty for loyalty. So if that loyalty is off the table, then that just obviously means the contract is void. My difficulty with the concept, though, is that the way the government contract is set up is that if that loyalty is not respected, then the other person still can walk away with half of the assets. That, to me, is unbelievably insane. That's like saying I could steal from, if I have a partner in business, I could steal from the company, and then when I get out of it, when we break off our contract, that I still get half of the company's assets. That nobody will convince me otherwise. This is just so obvious. It is so obvious. It's just we're often fall under like this, like, again, in my opinion, this like emotional cloudiness, and I can't understand it. So, Corey, final words of wisdom, my friend, because maybe we'll take another episode to dive deep into this one.
Final words of wisdom, I'd say, you know, obviously we've talked about a lot of values. I think, you know, at the crux of all this is really just open communication, being able to find your individual, your business partner, where it's a judgment-free zone, where you can provide generosity, where you put your biases aside, you look at factual information, and you sit there and try to propel both of each other. I think that's what it comes down to is open and honest communication and being authentic.
Love it. Ray, final words of wisdom, my buddy.
Something that resonated the most with me was when
Prenuptial agreements?
Larry, no, and I didn't bring up the topic of prenuptial agreement. I don't know what, like, I don't know, you know, what thorn got stuck in your foot there, but I was gonna say when Larry and Frank were riffing on this idea of when we fully accept ourselves, then we are like approaching like looking at the world with, through a judgment-free lens, you know? And I think that that acceptance of self is kind of like the seed at the root of all of these healthy behaviors we're talking about, like acting incongruent with your values and whatnot. And I think that one of the goals of this a magnificent group of men we have here, Wes, I think, is to not just protect ourselves from like alimony or whatever, but it's like to train men to behave appropriately in marriage, in work, in relationships. You know what I mean? To provide a roadmap for like the best kind of behavior. In that we can only really control ourselves, right?
100%. Love it. Larry, if you're still there, your video went dark, but I think you're still there in audio. Final words of wisdom, buddy. All right, I think you might be gone. Frank, I'll throw the mic over to you, bro.
I don't know if these are words of wisdom. It's just a goal of mine that I've been really trying to work on, and that's accepting me for who I am and loving myself. I think this might be a lifelong journey. The goal might be in perpetuity, but it's something that I've recently started to take very seriously and being cognizant of moments when I'm not doing that. And even though I'm very early on in this journey, it's already been paying massive dividends. I'm a very socially anxious person. When I go out, I'm not like an introverted person who hermit, but when I go out, sometimes if I didn't get a pump in that morning, if my hair's not looking right, if I feel like I'm not at my best self, I get nervous about going out because I'm fearing being judged as not my best self. And a lot of that has dissipated because I started to love me for who I am at the moment that I am. And I just encourage everybody to start with yourself and to reflect internally on how you can go on that own journey for yourself.
Love it. Outstanding, buddy. Ben, if you're still there, brother, final words of wisdom.
Yeah, I just, since I've gotten this group, I've kind of just been focusing on fully embracing, like, managing my relationship and keeping it, keeping the chaos, to a minimum, and, just focusing on what I need to do to have a successful relationship with my fiance. So it's, good place to be. And when you focus on it, you get results. So.
Yeah. And hey, I appreciate that, brother. And also for the record, I suggest that approximately 0 people follow my philosophy on this. It is a terribly miserable existence. I'm not giving this as a prescription. I'm hoping that you guys rub off on me more than the opposite. But I will always just bring my authentic self. And these are, like, honestly, the thoughts that pop up on my head. I'm hoping that you guys can rub off on me. It hasn't so far. So I think over time, when you guys are at my wedding, you'll be like, see, I told you so. And so hopefully we'll go in that direction. But I love all
Wes,
you guys.
I love you, man. I don't want you to change one bit, man. I love you just the way you are.
All right, dudes. You guys have an awesome week. Talk to you guys on Friday. Later.
Have a good one.